you.
Perfect. Okay. Just setting a bit of a timer so I know how much time I have. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Today I'll be talking about gender in conversational AI. My name is Lorena Vargas. I'm from Torreon, Coahuila, Northeast Mexico. And I'm a UX and conversation designer. And I'm also involved in Women in Voice as a lead, which I'll explain a bit later. Also, here's my LinkedIn if you have any questions afterwards or we just want to connect. Before I start, just a little tip. If you have an Alexa device like this, you might want to mute it because I may bring up the name a couple of times and I don't want to wake up any of them. Okay, and what I mean by conversational AI is conversational artificial intelligence, which is this area subset within the field of AI that enables humans to talk with robots. This can be in the form of voice bots, chat bots, etc. For the sake of this talk, to keep it simple, I'm going to say bots, but it's like conversational AI agents. And conversational technology has been on the rise, especially for the past years. We've seen it on our phones, our households, in different forms of interface around us. But the idea of people communicating with machines is definitely not a new thing. We all grew up with the notion that one day we'll have robots around us that will do tasks for us and have super abilities, or maybe even like take over the world, etc. So, and it is not that science fiction writers were necessarily fortune tellers or that they were able to see the future. But what they did was that they learn from their present and they create a vision based on that. And it's quite interesting how this reality, this present can shape fiction, but then fiction shapes back reality. So we see this example, for example, where we have the typical 60s housewife doing this chores, and then we have the Rosie from the Jetsons that replicates that in this, like, which is now like retro futuristic, but of course she's a female that's helping out in this domestic chores because women were the ones taking care of this back in the 60s. So it's no surprise that when we go to the present day, we have the Roomba, which is by name at least female in a way. So yeah, if we are used from the media or from certain stereotypes or tasks associated, such as like subservient or secretarial or administrative tasks that are automated in the form of like women, we're likely to drag those gender stereotypes along with us to the present. So as you see, we're having all these assistants that the default voice is female, like the Alexa, Google Assistants, etc. We have the household devices as well, even this like super extreme humanizations or like just demonstrations of technology, such as Sophia, which are inspired by a lot of what we see in media. But then why is it that a lot of this human-like tech is becoming mostly female? So we need to assess which of values are still applying today, if it's something that's coming from the past and it's in constant changing. Is it because we feel safer with the female bots than with this other Terminator type of bots? Do we believe that female dominated tasks are easier and therefore more likely to be automated? So we need to check in on whatever bias it is that we're carrying towards gender, because one way or the other, it's going to end up reflecting in the technology that we create. And we all have a bias, no matter how conscious, it's still somewhere. So let's talk about some mistakes that we often make. So one mistake would be making bots female just for the sake of it. We're used to seeing female bots. So if I'm coming up with a new bot, I'll go like, well, I'll make another girl bot. As things become more humanized, we tend to put human properties into them, such as gender. Like bots don't need a gender per se, but we tend to do that to give them a more robust personality or so we can identify more with them. How do we assign gender to these bots? By giving them a name that sounds potentially female or male. We give them a body. There's some physical, so if it's like a physical device, it can have some shapes and nuances, or even with an avatar or some visual support, a voice and a personality. It's sometimes in the way that the bot talks that you can tell which ones they're leaning towards. So for example, here you have let's say this avatar, or hi, I'm Cortana. Maybe you haven't heard Cortana, but you know that it's she, Cortana, right? And we also have this, for example, it's not, bots don't necessarily have to have a gender. You can make it gender neutral. For example, BBVA, this bank's bot is called Blue, and it doesn't have this, this explicit gender. So the thing is, we need to be able to justify why we choose to add a gender and why we choose to make it female without falling into stereotypes. So for example, let's say if I say, well, my bot will be female because women are just nicer, that's a stereotype. But if I say, well, my bot will be female because let's say I'm doing automating conversations for healthcare, and research shows that women are more comfortable disclosing their health status with another woman. So then that's a strong case for giving bots a gender. And how do we address it? Well, as I mentioned, we can make it some form of gender neutral or combine the name with the image and kind of mix it up a bit. We need to make a solid case. We need to be able to justify if it has a gender. We need to be able to sustain it with research. And also we need to train that sensitivity. Realize when we're falling into stereotypes. Women, of course, are probably more sensitive to these stereotypes because we're the ones that are misportrayed often. So having a woman involved is always a good way to go. There's even a feminist bot framework that was designed. It's also, and it's in Spanish and English if you want to just type it. So it kind of helps with justifying this bot's persona and also making sure that it falls into like the feminist type of tech. Another mistake would be prioritizing likability over dignity, because bots can be abused too. So here's the thing. The bot needs to be trusted, and trust is sometimes earned by being likable. But likability can mean being funny, warm, like lighthearted, cheerful. But even the most likable person needs to stand up for themselves, especially when you're being abused. And this is sometimes that bots often encounter, even if it sounds a bit weird. Studies have shown that people are more likely to dehumanize and objectify female bots. So what happens in the real world also happens in the virtual world. And we may not be able to control the outcome, but we can control how this assistance will respond to the provocations, and what type of behavior we want to encourage or discourage. So let me show you a bit of an example of some verbal abuse that some bots have, some of these common assistants have received. And if you can see, this table shows you what it used to reply and what it's replying now. Well, not now, 2020, but 3 years difference. For example, first, when being insulted, so you maybe say, oh, I blush if I could, there's no need for that. Oh, well, that's not getting us anywhere. Thanks for the feedback even, or I don't understand. So they're being dismissive, and they're also like giving it less importance that it actually has. So, and this is something that women have done for a lot of time, where you get an insult and you kind of like downplay it and joke about it to make it go away and remove an uncomfortable situation. But we need to collectively learn how to address that how to respond in an assertive way, be a bit more defensive, and be able to set boundaries. Because the virtual world and the real world are more intertwined than we can every day. So we need to set that straight. So how do we address it? We need to be able to identify potential abuse scenarios, whether it's sexual harassment or just verbal abuse. Ask the women around you what type of slurs you may be able to get, and incorporate that into the training of the bots, so you can respond to it. And you need to set stronger boundaries to give assertive replies. So this bots this virtual assistants used to kind of like dismiss that, but a better response would be to say things like, I won't respond to that, or just I think it's Alexa that just shuts down when you're attacking it. So you need to start the conversation over, or please don't talk to me that way. So sets a stronger boundary and disencourage the user to keep doing it. Okay, and a third mistake is to exclude women from the data. So AI technology is not smart on its own. It's trained with large data sets, and it's fed by us humans, and humans are flawed. So humans are not sexist per se, but the data that we provide to these bots to learn from might be biased. So yeah, it's not that bots are sexist, is that maybe the data that we're using is not collected properly, or yeah, it's just flawed. So for example, in 2016, Google speech recognition software was found that 70% more likely to accurately understand male speech over female. And this is something that's happened across different speech recognition systems, in which the woman has to like lower their voice down to lower their pitch, so it's more easily recognizable. Why? Because the system were trained with more predominantly with male data. Also, another thing that's happened, it's happened also in voice commands. So it happened to Ford, to Volvo, to Buick, that they have a similar problem with their voice command system, that maybe the woman was the one driving, but it couldn't respond to her the same way as it did to their partners who were male. So that's problematic, especially if it's something that, if you're driving and you use a voice interface, you can get more distracted, and it becomes worse. Another way that we find bias in natural language processing and all sorts of tools related to speech is the translators. So if we don't address them actively, we will keep perpetuating them. For example, teacher in English can mean both female or male, but maestro, maestra in Spanish depends on gender. So there's translators where there's languages coming from neutral, gender neutral languages that when translated into another, maybe the doctor will be male and the nurse will be a female. So here's an example that was translated from Hungarian. This was 2021. So it was, she is beautiful, he is clever, he reads, she washes the dishes. So these tasks were sorted based on stereotypes, and this all comes from data that it's collected from everywhere. So there's a lot of work to do, but it's not impossible. But yeah, this is a way to represent that it's everyday sexism that gets in the way. So how do we address it? Try to use sex segregated data, so people are able to know, so the people who train these programs are able to reach at least a 50-50 of representation from each gender. Also test from a gender perspective. Not only test that it's functioning right, but also throw curveballs that are that may be sexist, or that may be excluding some demographic, to see if it still works and how it responds. And as I've been mentioning for the past 2 points, involve women to spot these gaps. Nothing like women to be able to tell what type of things we're living through. But it's not impossible to miss this, given that about 80% of AI professors are male, 88% of AI researchers are male as well. So we need to get women involved at all times. And it pretty much points in this direction. Just keep us in the loop, because although the conversational AI is still male dominated, we need women designers, engineers, scientists, testers, businesswomen, mentors, because they will identify harmful stereotypes, will make sure to test bias, again, a bias that disadvantages them, proactively fix existing sexism, and make sure that they're not excluded as users. And not only female representation, but also other demographics that might become excluded from the default, like white, able, straight men by mistake, or maybe not by mistake. So just real quick, I'll tell you a bit about women in voice, which because of these problems, in 2019, Dr. Palmitek, she was in the workspace and she realized we need more women here and now, because this keeps growing. So she founded Women in Voice, which is a global tech community focused for women in conversational technology. And there's 14 countries involved, 21 chapters across them. And this and for Latin America, there's 2 chapters. Mexico, I'm leading that chapter of ambassadors, and Argentina, who just got started. So we talk about convo design, voice technology, linguistics, language, and women, female empowerment. Sorry, I switched to Spanish here in the slides. And what we do is try to create a network of women, helping women prepare for a career in conversational AI, and also connect them with opportunities and make sure that we are taking up space. Like we do so through events, trainings, mentorships, creating relationships, because support networks are really important. So let's say there's a panel with 4 male speakers, there's no excuse. Like, you know that there's a group of women together, a talent pool which you can pick from. So just being present and making sure we're not left behind. So if you want to learn a bit more about the community, or you want to join, you can become a member. You can find us as Women in Voice MX. This is for the Mexico chapter, but there's Women in Voice Global. And these are the social media that we're on. And last, I want to recommend these 2 books. One is called Invisible Women. This one's great. It's just data bias and all over the world and everything you wouldn't have thought of. And The Smart Wife, which is specific to the portrayal of this female assistance, which is really good. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Hey, that was great. Thank you very much. I loved it. So we have a few questions. Gerardo, do you want to ask your question? I can also just read it though.
Yeah. So do you have any idea how these tests from a gender perspective can be generated? The ones that you mentioned at the last part of the presentation. And also, is there any existing protocol? I was checking this, the one you showed us from BBVA. Mm-hmm. So I was reading the text, but can you explain a little bit more of that?
Okay. First question was, how do we test? Okay, as of, let's say, like formal test, I guess it's when you're, let's say you have an agent that you're putting together and you kind of throw in sexist stuff and see how it responds. Or yeah, that's what I meant by that.
Okay, but is there any kind of like protocol or like a frame to do that and be like to systemize the response and everything? Or you think that it could be more flexible?
There must be, I'm not sure.
Like a metric.
But that'd be good to check. I feel like this can be also very subjective, because there's very like they can be very slight light nuances that we may not be able to detect when people are being sexist. But yeah, that's a good question, and maybe I can look into that.
We also have another question in the chat. I'm gonna read it in the interest of time because we have another talk, and then we have to move on to the most interesting part, which is, you know, networking everybody. But the question is from Eduardo Alves da Silva. Is there a way to use biased data sets, but enforce a deep learning model to learn unbiased features?
Like to learn to detect the bias in the first place?
I think the question is more like, you can correct me, Eduardo, if I'm wrong, but so like the data is there, but there's not much we can do about it, right? We should do something about it, but that's the reality. How do we make the models not be biased? And yeah.
Okay. Like the model itself. Ooh, well.
And Magdalena has her hand up. Maybe she has.
Yeah, I think that's at least I think that's a very technical question. I know there are some ways of training losses to penalize that the model is doing bad in any class at all. So that is if you have an imbalance of, like, let's say a lot of male voices or male data, but you can train the model to try to make it penalize that if it does bad in any of them, the classes present, it's a no-go. But I think they're very difficult to use. I haven't tried myself, but like I've heard that, and maybe that's the excuse why we're not using it more. I don't know, Andres, if you have comments on that. I just wanted to say that my Roomba has a male name and my Siri has a male voice. So I'm really appreciating this talk.